Welcome to a new episode of Business Meets Life. And today you're going to view a beautiful conversation with a friend who I've known from Beijing, but now he is in Canada right now. David Xiaoshan, thank you so much for making time for us. Last night or a couple of hours ago, we had the elections in Canada, but you're still here with us. So tell us, how were you able to meet the former Prime Minister Trudeau years back?
Oh, okay. So what happened was with that is there's a process as to how that happens when you meet a prime minister, for example. I don't know how it works with like the American president or even the German chancellor. Like I think the processes might be different. But when you meet the Prime Minister of Canada, what happens is there's two ways it happens. Number one, you're usually selected by something called a member of parliament. And so a member of parliament is kind of like the American equivalent of a congressman or something like that, like kind of like that idea. So I was close friends with a particular member of parliament, and he calls me when I'm trying to remember when he phoned me specifically. It was during the time, if you remember, it was like around October of 2023, and I was just coming back to meet with Susan, if you remember her and everything.
Yes.
So I was coming to meet with her, and I get a phone call 2 nights before I'm getting on my flight, and the member of parliament says, we have an opening for you to have a sit down with Mr. Trudeau at the Liberal Caucus Party. Would you like to sit down with him and talk with him? Uh, I thought this, sure, let's do it. So there's that way, and then you get called by the RCMP, you have to submit all that stuff. RCMP is kind of like the FBI, like that kind of idea. Like, they make sure
Okay.
you're okay, or the Secret Service, and they make sure that you're not some sort of crazy person or you're not a criminal. They make sure there's no criminal background. And all that stuff obviously checks out. And then
Mhm.
I set up my time, met with Mr. Trudeau. We talked. Here's my opinion. He has a
Mhm.
very unlikable personality, like in the aspect of how he's conducted himself as prime minister, but in person, he's actually a nice guy. Like he makes you feel very warm. He's very polite. He gives you a hug when he meets with you. Like he'll hug, like he'll embrace you. Very nice guy. I didn't, he knew who I was. I shared with him about my work in China and working in the media industry in the Chinese. And, he complimented my Chinese. He says, "Oh, your Chinese is great. I heard, I saw some of your videos and I thought it was phenomenal." And he asked me, "How do you think we're doing with China?" I told him the truth. I said, "I'm not really pleased with how our country's, cooperating with China.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of things that the Western governments do that are very, how do I say, like, they don't understand how Chinese people think. Like for example, like this, you lived in China, just as long as anybody, and there's things you do with Chinese people, the way you conduct yourself with Chinese people that say you wouldn't do with a Western person. So, for example,
Absolutely.
you and me, I can how do I say this? I can directly confront you, or I can tell you I'm not pleased with something, and you could do the same with me.
Oh,
And then the
yeah.
next day, yeah, and we could forget about it. You know what I mean? Like we don't consider it to be a problem. But in Chinese culture,
Absolutely. Thanks.
you can't really directly confront even on a public stage. You know what I mean? So you have to be careful the way you approach things because things are very sensitive with Chinese people or government or
Yeah.
this or that. And you can relate to that because you've had thousands upon thousands of interactions with these
Yeah.
people, which are wonderful people. But that being said, they have a tradition, they have a way of doing things.
Now, with all the feedback that you gave Trudeau back then, 2 years ago, and I mean, you're a TV host, but you have so many other roles in your life, serial entrepreneur, and also, I mean, definitely an influencer here, also talking about politics and knowing different cultures and bridging them. Have you seen, are you able to say, okay, that feedback that I've given him, he actually implemented or something has changed? I don't know if it's possible to say.
You mean like, has my advice ever, like, affected who I
Mattered?
would have been, like, who I would, yeah, who I spoke to? That's a good question.
Have they like implemented it? Have they followed up what you said? I mean, they have tons of other kind of advisors,
Right.
those politicians, but
Well, the problem, so yeah, that's the thing. Like, prime ministers and presidents, they all have their individual advisory board or cabinet. And I think 90% of the time they don't even listen to them. Do you know what I mean? Like,
oh
I think
really?
I think so. I believe heads of state, like whether they're on the prime minister's level or a chancellor level or even on the presidentiary level, I think they have their own things in mind. Now, unless it's like really politically disabling or staggering, then obviously they're going to listen and not do it. But if it's comes to a regular topic, I think they'll still stick with their own stubborn ideas, even if they believe it to be right. They'll still do as they see fit, even if the public may feel a different way about it. If that makes sense.
Mm.
I has anything I'm thinking now. That being said, there has been instances where people have taken my opinion maybe seriously. Now, it wouldn't have been on the Western side. It's more on the Chinese side. I found that Western Chinese governments, I find, are a little bit more open to hearing something that's different than how they would think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that but that goes to that's another problem within itself. Chinese people, and I say this with the most love in the world,
Mm-hmm.
they are a different type of stubborn, if that makes sense. And
Please explain.
sure, they pride themselves on being this 5,000-year-old culture. And then
Right.
when somebody like us, who comes from a country who's probably less than 500 years of history, and then we're trying to tell them what to do, they look at us and say, "We have more history than you do. What do you think you could teach us?" Like, that's kind of the attitude I've gotten. That being
Mm-hmm.
said, that's not for everybody. I
Yeah.
think that's more in the traditional sense I'm speaking. I have tons of government friends in China that are dear friends, are police officers that are good friends, and I share with them, my thoughts candidly in the most polite way I can.
Yeah.
Um, and they love hearing the very direct, polite opinion that you may have or your observation you might have.
Yeah.
Um,
And that
Go
is
ahead.
actually something that you're so good at. I mean,
What's that?
with a common friend that we had in Beijing, we had to use your, as we say in Chinese, your good guanxi or relationships before. I mean, David has some of the
Oh,
most amazing high level relationships all over China, not
oh man,
only
that
in
was a disaster.
Beijing.
You're referring to that situation with
We probably
who?
don't have to talk about just here, but it's
No,
just
I don't mind
amazing.
talking.
Like,
I'm happy to
you're
talk about it.
diplomatic. You're really
I
like what
ca-
I wanted to say is you're so diplomatic. It's amazing how, as a foreigner in Chinese language, you're so diplomatic and well
right.
spoken and really like making amazing benefits for every party that is involved.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'm not perfect either. Like, I mean, like, I've made a lot of overstepping mistakes, like with, even today. I made a big, big boo boo where I didn't do what I was supposed to, and
Oh,
I've
that's
had to
so
apologize.
sad.
And well, it's like a simple difference of an opinion, and then you're supposed to follow the latter, but then you do what you want, and I've done that
Mm.
from time to time. And I apologize to my boss, and I would just say, hey, look, I was out of line. I shouldn't have talked like that to you. Right or wrong, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, that kind of thing. And I feel, how do I say, like, depending on the situation, like, I think apologizing, even if you don't need to apologize, sometimes goes a long way. And I mean that just because I think I don't apologize because of wrong or right. I think sometimes I do it just to because I value the relationship. Maybe I think maybe that would be the
Mhm.
way of putting it. Sometimes you can win an argument but lose the person.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes is this argument really worth winning compared to, losing the relationship. And,
Mhm.
if I can, judge between that, then usually that's how I stick to my guns, or how
Yeah.
or I apologize and, humble myself, if that makes sense.
Now, you're super famous in China, and it's just amazing. And I want to know a little bit more about your past very shortly. But as a TV host, working with Canada, with China, and I know you also travel around the world, what has been your biggest mistake that you said, like live on TV, or
Oh.
like the biggest failure?
My biggest failure. Well, there's a rule on Chinese TV, actually. They always tell you what you're allowed to say and what you're not allowed to say. So,
Mhm.
the three cardinal rules of Chinese TV is no swearing, no dirty language, no religion, and no politics.
Oh, yeah.
That's four I mentioned. So you're allowed to do that. Most of my shows were never live, thank God. That being said, there has been instances. Okay, I'll tell you one of the biggest mistakes I made. I remember when you moved to Beijing. Okay, when you moved into that apartment that was right beside me and our
Yes.
mutual friends and everything. Uh, right before you moved there, I did the Chinese New Year celebration on our national TV channel,
Oh,
right?
yeah. I remember that.
Uh-huh. And Dashan, who is my predecessor, he was on stage with us and everything, right? And he's like leaps ahead of me in terms of the caliber of who he really is. Like, if you
Mhm.
think I'm diplomatic, or if I'm professional, or if I'm famous, this guy, eats 1,000 of my cakes, if that makes sense, right? So
Wow.
he's really a good. So that's something to keep in mind. And because I was keeping it in mind too much, I messed up my Chinese so badly, to the point that I couldn't even speak English properly when I was on the stage too. So what happened was, I did the intro in English, and then I don't know why I froze or choked, because the earpiece that I had in my ear, someone was speaking, like, giving me suggestions while I'm trying to deliver the lines, and it screwed me up. And I was on live TV, and I chalked it up to a technical difficulty. But that being said, yeah, that was like a mistake I made on, 3,000 people in the audience, and a few 100,000 to 1 million people watching the show.
Wow.
But thank God the review got it as like a technical difficulty, and my coworkers, kind of picked up the slack when I, needed the help, and so I was thankful for that. So
Mhm.
I made a lot of mistakes, and I've had a lot of, big breaks too, but I've made a lot of mistakes too, and in the long run as well too. It's happened.
Now, you just spoke about Dashan, and I've always been wondering, like, where does your Chinese name come from? Because the funny thing is, like, I always called you David. You got introduced to me as David, but
Yep.
every single person, foreign and Chinese friends that we have, everybody calls you Xiaoshan. Everybody sees
Mm.
that name Xiaoshan on your WeChat, on like LinkedIn, everywhere. Where does that name come from? Is it now because you just mentioned Dashan, who's like the big and the very more famous person, and now you're the smaller one, or what's the story behind your Chinese name?
Yeah, like you, I've always been called David. So I mean, like, I'll tell you a secret. Actually, there's a secret
Oh,
between
yes.
you and me. I'll share it with you, so that way we're on the same page. Anyone that calls me David means that they're, close to me. Actually, either they're dear friends, or that they're family members. That's usually
I
the case.
appreciate it.
And it's true. So only people that call me David are usually either family members or dear friends. That being said, people that call me Xiaoshan, if someone calls me that name, that means they're either some sort of colleague, or
Fans.
professional worker, or a fan, or this or that. And that is how I differentiate with that. Even Dashan, I don't even really call him Dashan when we interact with each other. I call him by his actual English name, which is Mark. Right.
Mm,
So his English name is Mark, and I call him that. And nice guy. I mean, okay, so I'll explain that story, since that's a part of your question. Um,
yeah.
in 2016, the TV station that I worked with, they hired Dashan to host two of his shows, one in Canada and one in the States. And they asked me to be the guy that takes care of Dashan. The reason
Mm.
why is because the girls at our TV station have this problem where they don't treat him like a human being, if that makes sense. They treat him like he's elevated or like he's like a god or something like this. Oh, you're so nice. Ah, huh. Like, and I know he gets irritated with that kind of very whiny girly thingy. He's not a big fan of that. So my boss basically said, why don't you be the guy that takes care of him? You're unlikely to do that. And so yeah, and then as a joke, I did it anyways just to make him laugh. Oh, that's like, and it was a funny instance. Um, what happened was he knew me as David, and I know him as Dashan, or I call him Mark, just to make that I guess, the familiarity. But what happened was everyone assumed that I was his son or his like something like this on that level, like because he's old enough to be my father. If I really like wanted to crunch the numbers, he's at that age where he could be my dad if I really
I have to
wanted to.
Google him. I've never
Yeah,
even
yeah,
seen him. I've only
yeah.
heard from him from you.
I can send you a link so that way you could see what like he's when he speaks Chinese. Okay, if you think my Chinese is good, imagine like somebody that switched brains with like a Chinese person. Like he is very like his mannerisms are Chinese. His whole language. To give you a kind of an idea of who this guy is, what he did was he graduated from the same university that I went to study
Hmm.
Chinese because I wanted to kind of learn Chinese from the same place he did. And that's what kind of led to the stepping stone. And then what he did was he took up this like Chinese art called Xiaoshan. And Xiaoshan is kind of like two people going back and forth, telling jokes to each other and making the audience laugh, more or less. So it's difficult to be a comedian in your native language, but being a
Hmm.
comedian in a language that's foreign to you, that's so exceptionally complicated, it was never done before in Chinese history, let alone.
And
Go
that
ahead.
you learned not at you went to the Greater University in Toronto, right? You
I
learned
did.
it somewhere else.
I went to U of T, University of Toronto, yeah, and I studied in their Chinese program. That's how I slowly went that direction. And I
Yeah.
didn't even do it to become famous. Like that's the funny part. Like I had no interest in fame. I had no interest in being like I don't even want to use the word celebrity, but I didn't want to be well known. I had no interest in doing it. Even when I worked at the TV station, my official title was a marketing guy. I was just a marketing
Mm.
manager. I wasn't even someone who was supposed to host. My job was to convey Chinese thoughts into English language that Western people can swallow, if that makes sense.
Ah.
So that was my position, but they used me to take care of him. And so everyone
Hmm.
called me, oh, Dashan brought Xiaoshan today. And everyone started
Ah.
calling me that. And I'm trying to explain that's not my name. That's not my name. And my boss stops me and he's like, hey, no, no, no. Now your name is Xiaoshan. Now that's your Chinese name. We're not
Hmm.
calling you anything else but Xiaoshan. And when I got back to Toronto and everything, everyone starts calling me Xiaoshan. That's my official name. But I never did television yet. I was still just a marketing guy. Go ahead.
And just quickly for our listeners, so Dasha means big mountain and Xiaoshan means small mountain, right?
That's it. And I'm the little
Good.
one. And if you saw a picture of him and me together, I'm much shorter than him by leaps and bounds. Like he's like over 6 feet tall. He's massive. Like
Send
and
him the
he's a nice.
picture.
Oh yeah, I'll send you one. And he's a real nice guy. Like he's genuinely like a nice guy, if that makes sense. That being said, the way I got onto TV was a mistake, actually. So I'll tell you what
Okay.
happened. It was a really, really weird mistake. So 2017 is coming to an end. And what happened was Dashan has been contracted every year at the TV station I worked at to basically host the Chinese New Year celebrations. For
Mhm.
whatever reason, he got occupied with something else or was busy with something else that year. So the 2018 year, he calls my boss and says, sorry, I'm not going to be able to come. Don't bother sending my deposit. I have something else I have to take care of. Well, this is a problem because we're 2 weeks away from the show.
Oh,
We don't have a replacement. So I get a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning from my boss. And
emergency, David. We need you.
right. And I think he gave me that call just around that time when he just got off the phone with that Mr. Dashan, right? And I think the reason why he called me so late is because he was probably on China time. So probably it's like 3 o'clock in the morning. So that means it's 2 or 3, PM in Beijing or Shanghai. So he phones me and says, Dashan has just stepped out of the show. I said, oh goodness. Well, what are we gonna do? And he says, well, we're going to have to have a replacement for him. And I said, I wish I could help. And he says, well, you're going to help. You're going to take his place.
What
And
were
I
your thoughts when
said,
you heard it?
yeah. And I said, I'm not a host, sir. I don't do that. Like, that's not what I do. My job is a marketing guy. My Chinese is predominantly for professional purposes. Like, I don't do entertainment. He says, I don't care. He says, you're going to do it. He says, in the morning, go to the station, and there's a guy named John. He's like the lead host of the TV station. He's the guy that mentors the other hosts. He says, you're going to study with him for an hour a day. He's going to teach you the lines, what you're supposed to say, and he's going to teach you the mannerisms, how to stand, how to walk, talk, sit, this, stand. And I said, sure, okay, fine, I'll go to John in the morning. And so I go and I'm training every day with the other hosts to get this going. And the show was relatively successful. I was surprised how well everything happened. It was completely not what I expected. And then I started getting these weird calls to go on radio shows, to go on some other national television shows in China. And
Mm-hmm.
I went on many of the like I was so shocked with some of the opportunities I got to go on some of these TV shows because they typically don't accept foreigners to go on these shows. It's very rare.
So
So
why
to
did
break
they want you so badly? I mean, you also do like performances, but why did they want you? What made you different from other Chinese hosts, or why they suddenly wanted a
when you say
foreign
that,
host?
I think so. There's a few answers to that. I think the common answer is that when there is someone who is visibly non-Chinese speaking Chinese, sometimes that's easier to grab attention. And the person doesn't necessarily have to have good Chinese. It could be very elementary level or very basic Chinese, and it will still be. And if they're confident enough to do it, that is something they look for because you're going to know this as somebody that lived in China. There's a huge difference between speaking in a second language and performing in the second language. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I'll give you an example. Like, for example, there's words that you use in performing that you necessarily wouldn't use in daily life.
yeah.
Like ladies and gentlemen, round of applause. Next up, we're going to have XYZ. We don't use those words
Hmm.
in like regular daily life. That's only for formal events. And I didn't like, and if you don't have a grasp of how to perform in that language, sometimes that's difficult to find. And so I had some experience doing it. And the good part is it's easier when it's like reality TV as opposed to actual like soap operas or movies or this or that, because
Hmm.
then you actually have to memorize. If you can answer on a whim, it's a little bit easier to do.
Yeah,
So I
interesting.
think if that makes sense, I think sometimes it's easier to do Chinese TV to get onto certain Chinese shows if you have the ability. But then if you're in the West, you have to be very exceptional to go onto some of the shows like that are, like there and stuff like this, right?
Yeah. No, I understand. I mean, sometimes being a foreigner and being abroad, I see it myself. I get different opportunities. I was 29 when I got my first leadership trainings for German automotive companies.
Right.
Being German in Germany and 29, no matter how good you are, this is nearly impossible. People would not give you the same
Yep.
first of all, the opportunity, plus they wouldn't think that you are legit, no matter how good you are, right? Um,
Right.
so now you're basically working for Canada's second biggest TV channel, right? You guys have like Canada TV has like 1.2 million followers. You
It's
take
about that.
care.
Yeah, it's about that. We have different platforms that we go between. So, for example, I don't know how it is in Germany, but like some of the telecommunications companies in Canada, like Rogers or Telus or Bell, these are some of the three major, service providers. So,
Mhm.
companies that provide internet service and cell phone service and then TV service. Uh,
Oh.
we're on all these platforms here in Canada, and we do service the Chinese market. That being said, but how do I say this? Yeah, like I would just say it's just a different animal in that case. You know what I mean?
Mm. But beyond being a TV host, you do so many other things, right? I mean,
Oh
I
yeah, yeah.
remember hearing some stories from you back, like before we actually met, of being an agent. And from your LinkedIn, I actually saw that many, many years ago, you were even an ESL teacher in a kindergarten, which is such a common thing for native English speakers back in China, back in the days. And then you go on business trips quickly to New Zealand and then to Guangzhou. Like, tell us about what other kind of work you do, if you're allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, sure. TV is one. Acting as a consultant is another. Doing contract hosting work, so things like hosting weddings. Um, how do I say this? Doing brand, consulting and stuff like this. I've done that too. Connecting people with other people. I get paid to do that as well too. So, for example, if company needs an investor or an investment bank or something like this, I can arrange the two to meet with each other because I do have some friends that do stuff like that. So there's things like that among other things. I do some teaching as well too. I teach people how to host. I teach how do I say this? How to present yourself on camera, how to not be
Mhm.
nervous. I kind of show them little tricks that I learned over the years to try and overcome those things. Uh,
Mhm.
that's about it for now. Nothing major at the moment. No major new developments on top of what I
Uh-huh.
already do. And I do meet with some governments and stuff like that as well too in China or even in Canada. I meet
Yeah.
with a lot of provincial members of parliament or federal members of parliament. I've met with mayors and city councilors, high-profile business guys. The list goes on, and I've had great experiences, but it's not an easy life. Like it's hard and it's draining. One good thing about it is it gives you a lot of free time. So like I,
Mhm.
I could have like a job or two lined up, like two jobs lined up in a week, and that's usually more than enough to live off of. And then the rest of the time I have time to meet with friends and maybe run some errands, go to the bank, do my own thing, little things like that.
Yeah.
I appreciate the like what I do because I'm not super recognizable, meaning that you would only recognize me if you saw me on the TV. In daily life, if I'm walking down the street, I could go totally unrecognized, and sometimes that's a gift because I can
Mhm.
still maintain my privacy to a very good extent as well too. Because
Right.
once you're super famous and you lose that, it's difficult to go back, to any other way if that makes sense.
Mm. That's really good to know. Now, I have a question for you now that you said you also like give people tips on how to present on camera. What would be some of your tips for our audience here? Also, because I told you that my newest company nowadays, we also help other companies who want to start their podcast. And I always tell people, when you do your podcast nowadays, always do it with camera, not just like with the voice, unless maybe you're like introvert or so. What would be some of your tips for our listeners on how to present well on camera?
I think so. What I would say is that to prevent mistakes on camera, let's use that word.
Hmm.
Um, I would just say speak slowly. Always speak slow. And I don't mean noticeably slow, but speak slow enough so that way it gives you enough time to really think about what you're saying before it comes out of your mouth. Now, if by
Mm,
chance something slips out that you didn't mean to say, uh, then the key is not to freak out on camera, because if you freak out on camera, then obviously the other person knows something is wrong, or the audience would know something's off. So I try not to give that away too much. Just if you speak slow. It'll prevent a lot of mistakes. But if by chance a mistake is made, then I would just say just try and stay as calm as possible and just backtrack just a little bit, and then you can easily just usually the audience is very forgiving unless you say something totally politically incorrect.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, people are very oversensitive now in this time day and age, so uh everything is offensive apparently.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your tips. Good to know. I mean, you're super well connected. You and I actually had some conversation with your Omi, which is German and means grandma. You have some German roots as well, right?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I found out that it's funny you mentioned Naomi. And it's like an oxymoron almost, I would say. I found out by doing research on my grandmother's family history. My grandmother's maiden name was Dreger or something like this. It was the
Mm-hmm.
last name Dreger. And then I did some research on where this name even comes from, and I found out it's Jewish, surprisingly. Um,
Oh.
and I told my grandma, I said, isn't it funny? You're a German and Jewish at the same time from the time of the war. Like I said, how do you like? Why didn't you ever, you know, tell me? Because it made sense a lot. Because my great grandparents, my grandmother's parents, they housed a lot of Jewish people during the time of the war. And I never understood why they did that, and the reason why. And it's not that I'm like, oh well, how
Like
could
back
they
in
do that?
Germany or in Canada?
No, they did it. So there's a word that the Germans use, and you'll know this word. They call my type of Germans the Volksdeutsch, right?
Yeah,
And
Volksdeutsche.
that's what most of my family actually is. They were of German descent and had German passports and stuff like this,
Mhm.
but they were born in different parts of Europe, like places like
Mm,
Romania and
mm,
Poland and Austria and all these places. I think in Poland during the time of the war, Germans set up a lot of German colonies across the Polish-German border, and so there was
mhm,
like Volhynian colonies and so on and so forth, which my grandmother was a part of. Went to German school, like went to school in Poland and then came home to a German family and spoke German relatively fluently.
mm.
And it's not like as German as I may be in terms of heritage, the speaking aspect has just kind of left me,
Yeah.
unfortunately, because I don't speak it anymore. Like, unfortunately, I have a hard time understanding because I never practiced it like I should have.
Mm.
And I've never even been to Germany in my life. Like, isn't that sad? Funny too?
Yeah.
Like, as much as I'd love to go, I never went.
We gotta change that, David. You have a good friend who's German. Let's change
I
that this summer.
I do, and I'll meet with you, and we'll have some fun, and we'll definitely do that. Yeah, my grandma is gonna be 101 this August.
Wow. Please send your grandma my regards. I think I've sent her some voice messages or so before. Didn't we do that
Probably.
before?
I think so. You wanted to, how do I say this? Show her a good German woman that, like to play the girlfriend that I should have had. And then you said, I can make that happen. I could pretend. I could show your grandma. And we were joking around, you and me, right? And so we were having a
I
fun time
remember that.
laughing. Yeah, yeah. No,
Exactly.
that
Yes.
was a good joke. I remember that.
Well, I'm glad it worked out and she's still alive and she's still happy and healthy. 101 is an amazing age. So at the end, was your grandma Jewish or not?
I don't think she was a practicing Jew. I think what it was is she was more of like by descent at best. Like the last name is for sure Jewish because
Hmm.
what type of Jewish is it? Like it's called Ashkenazi or Ashkenazi Jewish people or something like this. It's that
Okay.
type of Jewish. So this is like a very typical European Jewish division, I guess, if that's the best way to put it. And I didn't
Hmm.
even know until I did some more looking into it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I asked her why she never told me. And, that's a pretty important detail to miss. And she never told me. I just but I found out, and it is what it is.
How did she answer to this question when you confronted her?
My grandma's a very proud woman. So what I mean by that is that she's and when I say proud, don't misunderstand. I'll explain. She's very proud of her German heritage, and what I mean by that is like she's very there like even when she became a Canadian citizen, like she was at heart a German. Like, she was I'm a German and you're a German and we're from the line of the Germans and we have a history of purity in our country and da, 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 da. I'm like, okay.
Interesting.
So
Ah, yeah.
it is. It's quite interesting, and I learned a lot about the war, like in the history of the German war, and how the Nazis came to power, and how Hitler became, how he actually became. Because there's a lot of things in Western history that we don't learn,
Yes.
and things that we graze over a lot. So the things that I learned from my grandma were very, very different from the things that I learned in school or
Yeah.
things like this. Not to say that they hid anything from me; they just graze over a lot, if you know what I mean. Like they really skip over a lot of details that are kind of important,
For
and it's
example,
very.
do you remember something?
Uh, for example, a lot of people think that the Nazis came to power is because Germans inherently hated Jewish people. That's actually what we learn in the West, and that's not true.
Oh,
What I learned from my grandma was the reason why the Nazis came to power had nothing to do about killing Jews at all. It had actually that it was like very little to do with anything at all. What the problem was is that Hitler is a guy that kind of he wasn't even German. Isn't that even funny? Like he's not even
yeah.
actually German.
Austrian.
Like he's an immigrated German at best. But yeah, what I learned was Hitler was kind of like Donald Trump in the aspect of making Germany great again. And
Mm,
that's what he ran on because if you were to bring money to buy like a loaf of bread in Germany, you needed like wheelbarrows to bring in money because the inflation was so high with the Deutschmarks and stuff like this. So it would like be 500,000 German marks just to buy a single loaf of bread
yeah.
during the Depression stage. And life was hard for the people of Germany, and so he joins this party, which is not even called it's not even called the German Nazi Party. It's called the Workers' Party or something, which eventually becomes, as you know, the National Socialist Party. And then the newspapers started making fun of the National Socialists,
Yeah.
calling them Nazis.
Yeah.
And that was the slang that they used in the newspapers to make fun of them. And
Yeah.
then the reason why he became so popular with Germans is because Hitler was saying what was in the hearts of the German people at that particular time. And they
Mm,
wanted Germany to be restored. They wanted, and it was a devastating war too, because people don't get it that World War One was solely blaming the Germans as part of the treaty that they sign at the end of the First World War. So they
mm,
make them sign that agreement in Paris. I forget what the Treaty of Versailles or something like this. And they sign
mm.
that agreement. And basically, what it says is all the responsibility of the war falls on the Germans, and
Yeah.
they paid, and they're ordered to pay the war reparations, which they did. But when they paid those reparations, it inflated their country to the point that it collapsed it. And
Which,
Hitler ran on a bunch of weird things where he said that the reason
mm,
the Great Depression happened is because the Jews owned the banks and they're the ones that caused this, but that's not true at all. It's
yeah.
actually the Americans that caused all that.
Which is interesting. Like, if you look at all these like National Day parades that you might have in France, in the US, all that pride, we Germans don't really have that, or are not really allowed to have those big military parades and to show these kind of things. But to be honest, this is something I really love about German culture. Like our grandparents, basically, they still had all of these kind of stories because they had experienced it, and slowly now it's fading away with people like your grandma. So make it's good that we recorded part of this, like, as a legacy.
Mm.
Now we're slowly coming to an end, but I have maybe two more questions for you.
We're coming to an
um
end already?
Slowly. I mean, you and I, we can always go on and on like nonstop, right?
I
Like
know
at
we could
our
talk
slumber
all hours of the
parties.
night. My goodness, I miss those days.
So last time we had the elections in Canada.
We
What's
did.
your outlook on like politics, the world, the USA and Canada, and the new prime minister? His name is Mark Kami, right?
Mark
Like,
Carney. Yeah, that's right.
oh, Corny. Sorry, I couldn't even read my own writing now. Yeah. Do you have like a prognosis? Like, how's the word gonna continue in Canada and China and
I
US
how
this
do I say
month?
this? I, I I'm not very hopeful, if you want my honest opinion, and I'll tell you why. Because the reason why we have a new prime minister is because of the Liberal Party, and so that's the party that won in our
Mhm.
like. There's three main parties. Okay, one is called the NDP, which stands for the New Democrats Party. Another
Mhm.
one is called the Conservative Party, and then the other is the Liberal Party, right? And the Conservatives were running a very, very successful campaign for the last 2 years, where they were showing all the incompetence that came from Trudeau's party and all his decisions. Um, I'll be fair before I say what I'm about to say. I don't believe that anybody that gets into the position of a prime minister or a president or a chancellor, that they're bad people or they hate their country. I believe that these people do love their country a lot.
Yeah.
And I think they genuinely believe what they're doing is right. That being
Mhm.
said, right falls into a lot of definitions, right? So Trudeau made a lot of very, very consequential decisions in the beginning stages of 2015. He ran on a promise of hope, and like one of his uh, what's it called? His political. There's a word for it, and I'm trying to remember the word. His campaign policy or his political policies. One of the policies that he ran on is he's going to legalize marijuana.
Mm.
And he ended up doing it.
Yeah.
And he got votes from the younger people, actually. And if you ask people back then why they voted for Trudeau, it's very preposterous answers. It had nothing to do with he's a good guy or a smart guy, or I like the way he talks, or like, the typical common voter answers. You know what I mean? the, the top two answers that people gave why they voted for Trudeau was number one, oh,
All
he's going to
right.
legalize pot or marijuana.
Mhm.
That's number one. And then the
Yeah.
second number one reason was, oh, he's so good looking. Oh,
No
he's such a good looking
way.
man. I'm not kidding. Canadians are very stupid when it comes to this. It's like
Really?
there's
I would
no,
not
yeah.
imagine this. Not out of
Well,
the mouth of a Canadian.
well, Canadians are very emotional voters, if that makes sense. So sometimes when people vote, they don't vote with their brain, they vote with their feelings. You know what I mean? And
That
so
sounds
a
like
lot,
China because feelings, emotions are also very important in China.
well, that too, but I think in China, the way officials are elected is very different than how our
Yeah, of
officials might
course.
feel.
Of
You know what I
course.
mean?
Yeah.
But people, when they vote for officials in the Western part of the world, I find that they're not really looking at the platform. They're sometimes not even focusing on what the words are actually saying. They're more focused on how the words are conveyed. And sometimes
Mm.
that's even less important than what the person's actually saying, right? So, I
Mm.
mean, like, people, when they vote, they're not voting because I thought this through. That's like, now this is the situation in Canada. I'm not talking about any other country. A lot of the
Yeah.
people will say, "Oh, he made me feel so good inside when he talked. Oh, I felt so warm when he like it's not like it doesn't make sense. And those aren't good
Interesting.
reasons to vote for someone, right?"
Wow. Wow. I've just learned something new. So I guess then America is going to take over Canada, huh?
Well, I mean, a lot of people have mixed feelings about this. Like, that's actually one of the top topics that was Mr. Carney and Mr. Trump actually talked about. One of the things that came up was, like, just to be clear with you, Mr. Trump, President Trump, did not respect our former prime minister at all. Like, not even a little bit. Like, he never even called him by his rightful title. Never really. He openly said how he thinks Trudeau's an idiot. He
Mhm.
openly said things like that were very like you shouldn't say publicly. You know what I mean? Like it was
Mhm.
and it was just a clear show that he didn't respect. He called Prime Minister Trudeau, instead of calling him Prime Minister, he called him Governor Trudeau. And why did he call him that? Because people that govern states in the USA are called governors, right? So they govern
Mhm.
their province or their state. And he was implying that Trudeau's going to cave into Donald Trump's requests to make Canada an annexed part of the United States,
Wow. That's
right?
crazy.
I mean,
Yeah.
it would be a huge. How do I say this? I don't know how it would work. You know what I mean? Like even if everyone was on board, our systems are so different, right? Because
Yeah.
Americans have a republic representatory government, and Canadians have a parliamentary representatory government, right?
Mhm.
So the way we do government is completely different. Our benefits are completely different. Our healthcare system is completely different. So it's really not the same country. You know what I mean? Like even though we
Mhm.
speak the same language and have the same food and all that stuff, and even though Canadians sound like Americans, we're very different, and we're not the
Yeah, I
same as
just learned
Americans.
that now.
Yeah. So we're really not the same as Americans. And I don't get treated well by Americans, actually. Like, I noticed this, like, when I was in China. I lived in China for a long time. And every time I came across someone who's from the United States, it's like they look down on me just because I was
Because you said
Canadian.
you're
You know what I mean?
Canadian? Mm.
Well, yeah, they would ask me where I'm from in the States. Oh, are you American? Are you from New York? Are you from California? Because when I speak, I don't use like my Canadian accent. I speak with a very moderate North American accent, right? So everyone mistakes me for an American, and then I have to clarify, no, 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 I'm Canadian. And then it's like, ew, it's like, ew, you're Canadian. Like it's like they treat me like as if I gave their child a bad haircut. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh, I didn't know. Wow, okay.
It's true. Like I mean, the way Germans and interact is very, very different than the way Canadians and Americans would interact. And
Mm.
there's some wonderful American people that I
Of
know as
course.
well too. I'm not saying all Americans are like
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
That's completely false. Like I know one of my closest friends is from Boston, and him and me are dear friends, and we've grown to be dear friends. And he's like me, like but he speaks Cantonese perfectly, but
Wow.
he's a white guy that speaks Cantonese, and I'm a
Mm.
white guy that speaks Mandarin. So him and me get
Yeah.
along very, very well. So
So now let's close the politics topic, but it's interesting to talk a little bit of politics because being in China, as you said, it's one of these topics, even like at business meetings that we usually don't really talk about. Like even, but when I'm in Germany and I talk to Germans, like even my former clients when I worked at HP, they love talking politics and the news and whatever it is on, right? Now let's quickly go back to you before we're closing this. What's happiness for you?
ooh,
Because it's not only about you and your success. And I know you mentioned a little bit about your work. And I mean, you're also an entrepreneur and the freedom
right.
that you have. But what's well being and happiness for you?
Well, happiness, I think, is relative, right? So I mean, like, I have a theory about this, and I could be right or it could be wrong, but you tell me. Um, Happiness, in the English language, the word happy, I don't know how it is in German, but happiness in English means that something has to be happening in order for you to activate that feeling. You know what I mean? So something has to be
Oh.
happening in that moment to give you that feeling of things. So I think, of course, everyone wants to be happy, and I do. I think happiness can be, people revolve it around, oh, my career makes me happy, or my love life makes me happy, or I have a good social circle and the events we do that makes me happy. That's
Hmm.
wonderful, but I think the happiness feeling sometimes is temporary, And I'm trying to think in my brain, what is permanent, right? What's like that permanent type of happiness that you're looking for, right? And I don't think I want to
Mm,
look for something to always constantly drive up that emotional feeling. I think I'm looking for joy in my life. And
mhm,
I think in my life, like I genuinely want joy because joy is, I feel it's permanent. You can't, no one can take that away from you. I think regardless if you're having a rainy day or a sunny day, you're always joyful.
mhm,
And I think for me, what I think I'll say this: Chinese has given me some of the best things in my life. Like, if you want me to be honest, like it's given me you. I'll use you as an example. Like, if I didn't speak Chinese, you and me would have never met. That's the truth.
that's true.
It gave me my work. It gave me my job. There is a lady friend that I am talking to and stuff like this, and she's Chinese. I never would have had any of those things or any of those experiences. All the good experiences that I had in my life all stemmed from being able to speak Chinese. And I had
Mhm,
some good stuff too. Like, I mean, I had a father that was very supportive, very encouraging. And I think when you have a parent or a father or a mother that has infinite confidence and belief in you, that does something to you. And I'm not referring to like where the parent is enabling the child, even though the child is a terrible person. I'm referring to parents that are genuinely, constantly trying to encourage the kids to take risks. I think, I had a dad that encouraged me to take a lot of risks in life, told me not to be afraid, to not be afraid of failure, because failure is a very, very looked down thing, but I think it's actually a very
mhm.
good thing. I think if you don't fail, you don't learn, and
True.
failure is very, very, it's very intertwined with success. You have to have a lot of
Yeah,
failures before you have success, and
yeah.
there's nothing
And I
wrong with
think,
that.
and that's something that we can definitely learn from like North American culture. Whereas in China, people try to avoid any kind of failure, basically. So, do you have
Well,
any specific habits or so that you regularly do that make you happy or that make you so successful? Because whenever I see you, no matter how difficult the challenges are that you were facing in any of your many work projects that you were doing or that you had to deal with, even to help other people, you always dare to help them with all of your resources, and you always stay so calm, and you always are nice and happy and positive and joyful.
well, there's a few things I do, like in pastime, if that makes sense. Like, for example, like you knew my favorite restaurant in China. We always went to the Thousand One Nights, and we would meet there and stuff
Yes.
like that. I love going to places like that where I can, sit down, do my work, play on my computer, have a shisha, have a nice little drink and relax. A drink of like a Sprite or cola, and just sit and relax and enjoy myself. I love going to the spa. I love spending the day at the spa where I go for a nice sauna, take a nice nap at the sauna, grab a meal at the sauna, and then I walk out feeling completely relaxed, like I'm walking on a cloud, little things like that. What else? I like to call a good friend. I love calling my dad. Like, my dad's very fun to talk to if you know him the way I do. So I would call him at least once a day, once every other day, just to see what he's up to and see what he's doing. And he loves to talk and get the update and what's going on with me and so on and so forth. And I've had I don't have too much to complain about. I'm grateful to have a lot of things in life, and I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our friendship. We've been dear friends for, oh boy, we met during the pandemic. Isn't that funny? We met during 2021 of the
Roughly, yeah.
summer, and I got into China because I was invited for a government meeting, and not many people could enter China at that time, if you remember. And
Oh,
I got in, and then Maz, our friend, he was like, "How did you get into China? Like, how did you
yeah, yeah, I
come?"
remember that.
You remember? And I lost my passport at that time too, and he lost his, and it was just one big. That's another problem. You lose your passport in China. That's like a crapshoot. You're gonna have a lot of things, right?
Yeah,
So, but
yeah,
all in all, I have no complaints.
amazing.
I'm happy to have food. I'm happy to have good sleep. I'm happy to take a nice you know at the end of the day, I'll take a bath, I'll sit in front of my TV, I'll watch a nice movie, whether it's Star Wars or something like this. I love Star Wars. That's one of my favorite movies to watch. So yeah, so I do that all
Good
the
to
time.
know. Wow, amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time for opening up to the Chinese, Canadian world, different pieces of your life, your happiness, your success. I've definitely learned something from you. And guys, if you love today's session, follow Xiaoshan or David, how we call him, and watch him on like the Canada TV or somewhere else in Chinese and English, it doesn't matter. You're seriously amazing. I'm very grateful for our friendship. And guys, I can just tell you, like, oh my gosh, David has such a, let me
Mm.
call this a crazy humor. He's actually so much fun. So yeah, I appreciate you, David. And guys, send this episode to other friends. Sharing is caring. See you guys next time.